Michael Brissenden. So, alcohol abuse and binge drinking, particularly amongst teenagers, is now firmly on the national political agenda. Apart from the Rudd announcement today, Family First Senator Steve Fielding has already introduced legislation into the Parliament that targets alcohol advertising and labelling. And next month, alcohol abuse will be one of the key issues to be discussed by the Prime Minister's 2020 task force, where there's a push to make midnight closing mandatory for licensed premises. Coincidentally, in Newcastle, north of Sydney, tomorrow, 15 of the city's pubs and clubs will face the Liquor Administration Board over the issue of all-night trading. The case is being closely followed by both sides of the alcohol debate, as Sharon O'Neill reports.
It's Saturday night in Newcastle. In the early evening, the streets are quiet, but it won't stay that way. At the city's police headquarters, the local command is preparing for the night of the week they dread most, when the streets of Newcastle are overrun with binge drinkers.
This is occurring on our very doorstep, and the residents and small businesses really can't take it anymore.
We have the highest assault rate in New South Wales, which is appalling. The vandalism is out of control.
The red light is on.
Something's got to change, otherwise we're just going to continually go down a downward spiral.
It's just after 11 p.m. and young people from the suburbs of Newcastle and surrounding regions are arriving in the city. They have a choice of 15 hotels in town, most of which will stay open until 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. It's an intolerable situation, according to Tony Brown, who's leading a coalition of more than 100 local residents and businesses who want the pubs closed at midnight.
We know there's an epidemic of toxic binge drinking amongst young people in Australia, yet there's a green light in Newcastle for the young people which is saying we're free to open till 5 a.m. in the morning. And this is having dreadful devastating the young people and also the local community.
Closing the clubs a lot earlier, closing them at midnight even, is obviously going to restrict our social time, and not only is it unfair, it's just disappointing, to be honest.
I mean, people will still drink, but they'll just drink a lot earlier, and they'll probably drink to the same extent they would on a Friday or Saturday night, and so the problems that we're seeing will still occur.
It's almost midnight and the police and ambulance officers attend one of the first casualties of the night. The city is now full of young people wandering from one hotel to another.
Most of the residents live in the city are 55 and over, and they won't come out after dark, and they don't enjoy their environment because they're scared.
Because they're worried about the drunks?
Absolutely. Look, I know people now who drive 4 blocks to go to the movies because they won't come out of the cinema late at night for fear of bashings or assaults.
Weekend binge drinking has become so bad in Newcastle that the Liquor Administration Board will tomorrow hear a case brought by the police against the late-night operating hours of 15 of the city's hotels. The number of hotels involved in the case makes it unprecedented.
A number of statistics and research shows that there's a direct correlation between trading hours and the level of violence and antisocial behaviour.
What happens in Newcastle will be closely watched in other parts of the country. Next month, the problem of binge drinking will be on the agenda as part of the Prime Minister's 2020 summit.
There you go. Oh, Vicky, no!
One of the summit leaders, World Vision Chief Tim Costello, has put the opening hours of pubs and clubs firmly on the agenda.
I can't essentially see why they're open after midnight. I just don't get why that's really acceptable. And I think what we're trying to say is you can have a fantastic time, you can go clubbing and dancing and partying without getting smashed. Now, keeping them open and serving drinks after midnight doesn't send that message, and the reality is, as we know, huge community fears about what this is spilling over with violence and interference.
If you're asking me, is a curfew or a restriction of trade the answer? Absolutely not. It is wrong. It will not address the issue in any way, shape or form.
Eamonn McCabe is the licensee of the Crown and Anchor and the spokesman for Newcastle's inner city hotels.
If there are people who are causing who are the cause of antisocial behaviour, we have outlined manners in which they can be identified, distilled and removed from the system. So should the other 20-odd thousand people who visit Newcastle be punished because of the actions of a few?
The Newcastle licensees say controlled drinking on their premises is not the cause of the binge drinking problems, but rather it's uncontrolled drinking that takes place on the streets or other locations. The hotel owners have decided to introduce an identity system where all patrons will be photographed, as well as a barred from one, barred from all policy. But they've also called for tougher penalties and increased security to tackle the problem, rather than earlier closing times.
The majority of the incidents, or the majority of the occurrences, or the disturbances, if you can say that, are occurring on the street, in pedestrian corridors, in places of public congregation, in taxi queues or in bus stops, basically in public places. The New South Wales Local Government Act currently requires that a person be warned once and be detected a second time in an alcohol-free zone or area before a very minimal fine is imposed. It is an unworkable law, it is an unenforceable law.
The problem with focusing on more fines, more police, more CCTVs, etc., is that it's diverting critical attention away from the fundamental causes of the problem. And that's simply that there is too much alcohol out there.
I don't want it to shut at 3 o'clock. No way. Open till 5 is the best way to go about it.
Why is that?
It's just about making money for the clubs and us just getting drunk.
This is actually considered by many to be a quiet Saturday night in Newcastle. With the rebel bikie gang in town, extra police have been brought in from Sydney. It makes life hard for any of the locals who step out of line. But next weekend, it will be back to normal. And that's not good news for the local shop owners.
Well, from a business perspective, and being a business owner in the city for nearly 60 years, I think it's the mess that's left behind. I mean, it's the where they've broken bottles, smashed glasses. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's costing business owners.
I think we've got too many outlets, much too long opening hours. We've got binge drinking entrenched among young people. We have to have a look at this again. So, yep, it may curtail some people's notion of freedom, but when it's affecting other communities, sorry, we have to act.
If the licensing board decides to reduce the opening hours of the Newcastle pubs and clubs, it may well spark similar cases around the country. The question remains, however, will it do anything to solve the growing epidemic of Australia's binge drinking problem?
Sharon O'Neill with one glimpse of what the government has identified as a national problem. Of all the writers who've been